Now, on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app, O'Connor and Company.
It's 7:07 on O'Connor and Company. Good morning. Thanks for tuning in here to our little morning extravaganza. Coming up at 7:35, Richard Goldberg, Foundation for Defense of Democracies. We'll get his take on the Persian Street and how the efforts in Venezuela that we saw over the weekend actually will affect freedom in Iran. Then at 8:05, Dr. Peter McCullough on your new vaccination schedule for your kids here in America. That's coming up. Larry O'Connor, Julie Gunlock under the weather this morning, so we will keep her in our thoughts and prayers. Joining us now, Dustin Grage, investigative journalist at Townhall, a columnist there, and he's based in Minnesota. Dustin really came onto the scene when Tim Walz was plucked out of nowhere by Kamala Harris to be the running mate, and Dustin's like, oh, I know this guy. And your columns have been vital since then, Dustin. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Larry. Happy to be here.
What an extraordinary day yesterday. Tim Walz opts out of re-election after he had already formed his re-election campaign, was already in the midst of it, raising money. What really happened here? Because Lord knows from his statement yesterday, I have no idea. What do you think?
No, it's quite incredible, Larry. And I'm old enough to remember back in July when he had released a statement his staff did to the Star Tribune here in Minnesota, our largest paper, that if he were to run for a historic third term, that he's going to win in a landslide. Well, here we are 6 days now into the new year, and he didn't even make it that far. It's absolutely incredible. But at the end of the day, what really won this was the Rufo report bringing older stories to light and exploding them, which then accelerated this independent journalism that's coming across the state of Minnesota. Like, I mean, I've been doing it for a while, and my stuff has been blowing up, no question. But then it brought these other characters involved, like a Nick Shirley and a Nick Soter, and all these other people started raining in on Minnesota and started covering stories, frankly, that nobody else was covering. Yeah. And then it just developed into this swirl of a tidal wave, and eventually it just became too much for Tim Walz, to the point where he actually called the cops on one of the independent journalists just standing outside his house and reporting. So it's incredible, and it just got to him at one point, and he decided, I can't win re-election, so I'm going to try to dodge accountability by handing the reins over to potentially Amy Klobuchar here, and then when she has to vacate her seat, if she were to win, she is going to appoint him to the U.S. Senate. So that's currently his current plan right now.
Wait. Let's just be clear here. So the idea is Klobuchar is going to become governor, and as the new governor, she appoints Walz as the senator?
That is correct. That is the current plan. Larry, like when he originally came onto the scene as a potential vice president candidate, he was maybe in the top 5 at one point. I was screaming from the roof 2 weeks before it actually happened that he will be the next VP candidate, and people called me crazy.
I remember.
The same sources that let me know that information when he was starting to get the vetting papers and when everything was getting lined up, they are saying this right now as well. They are very close to the governor, and this appears to be the new plan.
Wow. Now, you just said something really important. First of all, 2 things that you just said, Dustin. First of all, it's true. Tim Walz blamed what he called a right-wing media on his downfall here. That's another way of saying journalists, basically journalists doing journalism, right? Because it's not like you don't have newspapers and TV stations there in the Gopher State. So is there any shame right now in the Minnesota media circles when they recognize that these are all stories that were just sitting there waiting to be reported, but it took crazy right-wingers like you to get there?
Yeah, no, there's no question. And don't get me wrong, there are conservatives in these newsrooms, and they've personally let me know, like, hey, when I hit a roadblock in my newsroom and someone stops my story, I usually get handed it. And then I post it on Twitter and it blows up. Or they just let me know, hey, we tried this story once and it just didn't get the traction. Because that does happen on occasion too, but it just doesn't get the traction. Okay. But the moment Tim Walz stepped into this national spotlight, Larry, that is when everything just exploded. And it's going to be the same case with Amy and any Minnesota politician, frankly, that ever goes national. Tim Pawlenty came back after he ran for president. Michelle Bachmann came back after she ran for president. Two very popular conservatives nationally, especially at the time when they were doing it. Yeah. They almost lost. Tim Pawlenty got crushed in his primary. And Michelle Bachmann, who is beloved by conservatives, came within half a percentage point of losing in one of the most conservative districts in the country. So when these politicians in Minnesota go national and they come back home, they usually don't do well. And that's the case for Tim. And frankly, it's also going to be the case for Amy if she were to run. So I don't think it's a walk in the park for them still. There's still going to be an uphill battle. This fraud is attached to all of them, and it's going to sink them.
We're speaking to Dustin Grage. He's an investigative journalist and a columnist at Townhall, colleague of mine over at Townhall. Dustin, you also mentioned that he was going to lose. And I said earlier in the show, the only reason a politician does what Tim Walz did yesterday is because they're going to lose, and they'd rather go out on their own terms rather than lose an election. Does that mean basically some elder statesman had to tap him on the shoulder and say, Tim, it's time to go? Otherwise, we're going to have Mike Lindell as the governor. I mean, Mike Lindell really is the only Republican right now of prominent. Or you tell me, is there another option there for Minnesota Republicans?
Oh, yeah. There's actually a very popular good slate here. And Mike Lindell's going to be the national name people recognize. But we've also got the Speaker of the House running, Lisa Damon. We've got the chair of the Fraud and Oversight Committee in Kristen Robbins. We have some very, very good lawyers running that are going to have a good bankroll. I mean, there are actually like a lot of candidates. There are probably 4 or 5 on the list that I think could win. There's no question we have a great slate of candidates. And also, from what I've heard, there are some big names that might get involved here. They include the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and even Elon Musk. They are dead set on winning the state. And I just recently learned, it was actually quite incredible, Elon Musk is actually a Minnesotan. His great-grandfather did rodeo in Minnesota throughout his life to pay for college. And his grandfather was born just a couple hours north of me here in Minnesota. He actually has Minnesotan roots, and he's starting to bring this all up now. And I'm like, why are you starting to bring this up? And I just have to think, maybe he wants to get heavily involved. I mean, he's been pushing all the fraud stuff. It sounds like his PAC might be interested. So
that would be fascinating.
Charge on Minnesota, no doubt about it.
Dustin, earlier we played some audio from your exclusive investigative report there on the Somali fraud issue, and I want to draw some attention to it because you're taking a different angle here, and that is, listen, the people of Minnesota and the people of this country, we have big hearts, we are charitable, we do want some of our tax dollars to go to people who need it, and most specifically to children who require special services. And so you interviewed a woman who runs an autism center that is doing great work for children with autism. My son has autism. I know how great these people are and how great these centers are. They're now suffering because of the fraud that was allowed to happen under Keith Ellison and Tim Walz. Tell me what you learned here.
Yeah, so basically what's happening is after a decade of completely ignoring these fraud issues, Republicans have been screaming from the rooftops, but they've gone on and ignored them. And what that has resulted in is potentially hundreds of millions of dollars in fraud in the area of autism services alone. So then what happens is Tim Walz takes this dirty bathwater and he throws the baby out with it. And that's quite simply what it is at this point. They did no actual audits to determine, like, who are actual trusted providers who have been in service for 20-plus years, run on the thinnest of margins, and then slapped every single provider in the state with 90-day holds on their payments. But when you have hundreds of employees, hundreds of children, because in many cases, these are one-to-one. Like, when we're talking about autism centers like this, they're just low-functioning autism kids. They are nonverbal. They sometimes are disruptive. They aren't even allowed in some public schools. So they need special services, one-on-one attention, and quite frankly, they also not only get better attention at these autism centers, but it's actually provided to the taxpayer at a cheaper rate. Because they do it more efficiently than government.
Yep. So and the children actually do see progress in those scenarios. Yeah. It's everything that's right with programs like this, but they're the ones suffering because of everything that's wrong with the fraudulent. Unbelievable. And the stories just boggle the mind. Dustin, we got to leave it there, but don't be a stranger. Yeah, Minnesota is suddenly the center of the American political conversation, and Dustin's been covering it like no one else. Thank you so much for doing great work, Dustin.
Thanks, Larry.
Dustin Grage, catch his column over there at townhall.com.
WMAL, making sense of the news. Live from the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios. Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
Yesterday, almost a year into his presidency, Donald Trump announced a promise kept as he campaigned on the notion that the CDC should reevaluate the nation's recommended vaccine policy for children under the age of 18, and a new policy was revealed. The CDC now recommends all children get vaccines for 11 diseases. Up until now, it had been 18 diseases on the schedule. They put out a graphic that was quite startling. In fact, in European countries, children get 11 injections by the time they reach 12 years old. In the United States, that's 72 injections. Now, a lot of that is because many of the vaccines have been I don't want to use the word diluted, but they've sort of spread out the dosage of those vaccines. But it was for 18 diseases versus 11 in other nations. Now America sits down at the 11 number. Here's where it's going to continue to recommend. The children still get vaccines for measles, mumps, rubella, polio, pertussis, tetanus, diphtheria, Haemophilus influenza type B, oh, darn it. Why do I have to do this? Pneumococcal disease, HPV, and chickenpox. Vaccines for high-risk groups include RSV, hepatitis A, hepatitis B, dengue, and 2 types of bacterial meningitis. But the mandatory, or not mandatories, but the recommended that many districts turn into mandatories are now dropping down to 11 diseases. The president also put out a post on Truth Social that said pregnant women don't use Tylenol unless absolutely necessary. Don't give Tylenol to your young child for virtually any reason. Break up the MMR shot into 3 totally separate shots, not mixed. I recommend that as well. Take chickenpox shot separately. Take hepatitis B shot at 12 years old or older. And importantly, take vaccine in 5 separate medical visits. That's the president's personal recommendation. We'll get to a doctor and all this because I ain't a doctor. Trump ain't a doctor. But Peter McCullough is a doctor. He's going to join us at 8:05 to flesh this out a bit more. Right now it's 7:21. Are we on the brink of a historic regime change in the Islamic Republic of Iran? Could be. We'll talk to Richard Goldberg of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies next. It's 7:30.
WMAL-FM, Woodbridge, Washington, a Cumulus media station. Making sense of the news. News Talk 105.9. WMAL. News now. Now on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app. O'Connor and Company.
7:37. It's O'Connor and Company. I just want to reflect again on our last story that I guess things are so great in New York that Zohran Mamdani now has to turn his communist sights on tickets to the World Cup. Because, hey, he's been in office 5 days. Everything else is solved now. Let's just make sure everyone can get to the World Cup. If every New Yorker goes to see a game in the World Cup, they'd have to build like 1,000 more stadiums to accommodate them all. All right, maybe not 1,000. But there's only 50,000 seats. Maybe 60,000 seats. How are you going to do that, pal? It's called supply and demand. I love having to teach economics to a Marxist. Joining us right now, Richard Goldberg, senior advisor at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, former National Security Council official. Richard, thanks for joining us. Remarkable sights we're seeing there in Iran. What's the latest?
Yeah, I mean, we're on the 10th day of protests in Iran right now. I mean, we have a real national uprising on our hands that continues to grow and spread. We're not quite at the size of people that were out in the streets back in 2009 in the Tehran area. We're not quite at the number of people in the streets nationwide as we saw in 2022, though that may happen. The breadth of the protests, just the scope and how many cities these are in, the fact that these are crossing from all kinds of ethnicities and backgrounds, people of all income levels, religiosity levels. It's really far and wide in the regime, and the chants are death to the dictator. This is not our regime. We want him out. And the President of the United States, I think, has now pushed more and more Iranians into the streets by saying, I have your back. I'm not going to tolerate what has happened in the past by thousands of people being gunned down in the streets.
Yeah, I mean, knowing that the White House is engaged in this, and unlike previous administrations, will actually hopefully have the back of those protesters, that could make a difference. Do we know what sparked this? I know some of the last protests that you've cited there happened because the authoritarian, religious police, beat to death a woman because a lock of hair was shown under her hijab and things like that. Was that another incident like that inspired these protests? Where did it come from?
I think this is a convergence of events, and remember, the embers of that 2022 uprising never actually went out. At the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, FDD.org, you can find an Iran protest tracker, and we have kept track of this all through the years. And every single day in cities around the country, there are 10, 15, sometimes 50 to 100 people who come out and protest. Now, to have something this large scale, you're right, needs some sort of a catalyzing event. But it was really just a matter of time between the economic situation continuing to deteriorate, between the maximum pressure campaign of President Trump and the mismanagement of the regime itself, alongside the fact that, if you will, the Ayatollah has no clothes, right? The emperor has no clothes. The Ayatollah has shown us that. No air defense, now no nuclear wild card to pull out and try to say, I have something that will keep the West away. People are not afraid anymore, and their lives are suffering, and they're just saying to themselves, what are we doing here? We need a different regime. We need a different government.
I also saw that Reza Pahlavi, the exiled crown prince of Iran, who's actually lived in America, Northern Virginia, I believe, since 1979, he appeared in Egypt to cheers and people waving the old regime flag of his father, the Shah of Iran. And he seems to be sending messages to the protesters directly that he's ready to take over if necessary. Is that where this is headed, do you think? And is his presence sort of a different element to this? This is the first time we've seen him step up like this.
I agree with that. Now, it is undeniable if you look at the verified photo evidence, audio evidence, videos that are coming out of Iran itself, the chants for Pahlavi are there in many of these crowds. Not all of them, but in a lot of them. I think it's a little bit dangerous for us in the United States to pick winners and losers from the outside, and there are differences in the opposition and in the camps that are out there in the streets. But if that is where the people coalesce around some sort of, constitutional monarchy, the way that Great Britain has, or some other model there, certainly they're not going back to an era of dictatorship like the Shah. But there is clearly an affinity for the monarchy, an affinity for Pahlavi in the population. And wow. I think we should not be afraid of it.
What an incredible turn of events here. And there's another aspect of this that is, obviously the astounding bombing run on the nuclear facilities from last year certainly, put a dent in the facade that is the Ayatollahs and the untouchable regime that are in Tehran. But also this recent action in Venezuela actually has a ripple effect back to Iran, doesn't it? Those two nations were linked.
This has a huge ripple effect. First of all, obviously a psychological one on the supreme leader and the regime, now booking their tickets to Moscow and being ready at a moment's notice to go.
Looking over the shoulder every time they hear the sound of a helicopter in the air, I'm sure.
Exactly. But honestly, the Venezuelan regime, Maduro's regime, had become the playground for Iran, the Revolutionary Guard Corps, and Hezbollah, along with Russia and China. So much of the regime's illicit financing tools came from Caracas. I mean, we've seen in recent weeks when President Trump imposed this naval quarantine, started stopping some of the oil tankers coming out. These weren't regular oil tankers. These were linked to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps the narco-terrorism that Maduro was running there in Venezuela helped finance much of the regime's illicit activities. So the squeeze is now further put on the Revolutionary Guard and Hezbollah and the regime itself. They've lost this hub for sanctions evasion and military adventurism in South America, but also just the reverberation of there's one less asset, there's one less ally on the map right now for a regime that has no air defense, has no way to stop a follow-on airstrike from the Israeli Air Force or others. And the people, I think, are smelling that, and they want a different direction for their country.
This November will be the 47th anniversary of the siege of the American embassy in Tehran that led to the Iranian hostage crisis. Richard Goldberg, when we hit that anniversary, will this regime still be in place?
Well, God willing, it won't be. It'll be in the ash heap of history, as President Reagan would have said. But the security forces are still there. There are things the United States or Israel could do to weaken them further. Cyber attacks. Obviously, the president seems to have suggested kinetic strikes on internal security forces. But if you blind the command and control of the security forces and provide some sort of information flow, secure communications to the people in the streets, and if they had a real leader organizing them and inspiring them, things could move pretty fast.
That regime has more American blood on its hands than any other country on this planet, and it isn't even close. What a remarkable turn of events it would be to see them finally fall. Richard Goldberg, you guys have been doing the Lord's work at Foundation for Defense of Democracies for so long. Can't wait to have you back on for an update on this. Thank you, sir.
You bet. Thanks.
Later this morning on the Chris Platt Show, the jail for Maduro in New York also held Ghislaine Maxwell, P. Diddy, and Luigi Mangione. It's like Beverly Hills with bars. 9 a.m. on WMAL.
We have an update on yesterday's story about what appeared to be either vandalism or an attempted break-in at the Ohio residence of Vice President J.D. Vance. An arrest has been made. William DeFore, 26-year-old son of two wealthy Democrat donors in the Cincinnati, Ohio area, was arrested. Also, incidentally, William DeFore, for the last several months, has been going as Julia DeFore. Yes, it's more transgender violence. Julia DeFore identifies as a student at Cincinnati State Technical and Community College. Born William, now identifying as Julia. The Vances, of course, live in the official vice president's residence on Mass Ave in D.C., right on Embassy Row Northwest. The Vances were not at the home at the time of the violence, where two windows were broken, and it appeared as though it was an attempted break-in. However, the vice president was, I understand, in Ohio at his home over the New Year's holiday, so he had just left with his family. According to William DeFore, going as Julia's father, is also named William. He's a successful Harvard University graduate. He's a pediatric urologist in the Cincinnati area and works as a professor in the University of Cincinnati's College of Medicine. And they are wealthy supporters of the Democrat Party. According to public contributions, he donated $5,000 to Joe Biden's campaign and $5,000 to Vice President Harris's campaigns in both 2020 and 2024. One other note on this, J.D. Vance put out a statement yesterday after the story broke, before an arrest was made. He says, I appreciate everyone's well wishes about the attack at our home. As far as I can tell, a crazy person tried to break in by hammering the windows. I'm grateful to the Secret Service and the Cincinnati police for responding quickly. We weren't even home as we had already returned to D.C. One request to the media. We try to protect our kids as much as possible from the realities of this life of public service. In that light, I'm skeptical of the news value of plastering images of our home with holes in the windows. Yeah, see, as this report came out, people, of course, were sharing pictures of the home that J.D. Vance and his family own and live in Cincinnati, just to show the damage that was done. But then that, of course, becomes information people can use through image searches online to reverse engineer and find out where the vice president lives when he's not in Washington, D.C. You know, his residence here in D.C., as you know, is guarded with fences. It's the former Naval Observatory, but not his home in Cincinnati. Yes, they have Secret Service protection, but it's not the kind of military security that he gets when he's here in Washington. And there are a lot of crazy lunatics out there, as we've seen in the era of a post-Charlie Kirk world, when he's the running mate of a president who's had to endure 2 assassination attempts. I think that the vice president makes a good point. And let's not forget what his neighbors in Alexandria did to him when he was a senator here in Washington from Ohio and had been named the running mate to Donald Trump back during the 2024 election. They plastered photos of his home all over social media, doxing him, identifying where he lives, to invite just this sort of lunacy. Because, sadly, that's how the left is in our society. They're fine with it. Until they show me otherwise, until they start behaving otherwise, we have to assume that at this point the organized political left in Washington and in America writ large is just fine with political violence if it's targeted against the likes of J.D. Vance, Charlie Kirk, and Donald Trump. Say a prayer for the Vance family. It's going to be a long road for them as they've chosen public life, as they've chosen a life of service to our nation, and that means that everyone in that family has a target on their backs because of the despicable actions of the left in this country. 7:53.